What's up, everybody, and welcome back to my studio. I'm Joseph Finchum, you are you, and we got a fun one today. We're going to have a little bit of a story time. So instead of painting and telling you what I'm doing while we do this and me not talking to you, we're going to listen to a narrative that I have created around the painting we will be doing today. Should be fun, I hope. Um, if you have headphones, I suggest wearing headphones because you can set the volume right. Don't worry, there are no jump scares or loud noises. It's pretty steady throughout. Um, in your Halloween is my favorite live stream to do. I know it's not Halloween yet; it's a couple days before, but it's okay. Um, in years past, 2 years ago, I did a bunch of video stuff, things on the screen. Last year, I did things on the screen, video stuff, sounds, and a few costume changes. I won't be doing any of that today. Mostly, we'll be watching the painting happen and listening to the story. I hope you're all ready for this. I put this together in a week, so there may be some problems. It's from the story that I wrote, but I had to edit it down to make it fit within the time. It may go faster than 2 hours. I don't know. We'll be taking breaks. There are chapters, so we'll talk in between the chapters if you'd like. I'll be trying to pay attention to the chat, but I won't be responding because there will be no sound from me while the story is playing. And once the story starts, it has to play out. I can't pause it. I haven't figured that one out yet. So, okay, let me show you what we're doing. This is Jack the Lantern. Basically, the story that the Jack-o'-lantern is based on, but with my own little twist. Started off as Jack the Lantern, and then because it was an Irish folklore, it eventually became Jack O' Lantern. No need for scene changes today, Clark. Everything, hopefully, will go as planned, and I will be doing it all myself. Because it's an audio thing, and I'll be listening to it too. When it ends, I'll know that I should shift my attention. So, but this is the view we have. We're not getting any closer or any farther away. But yeah, we're gonna go for it and see what happens. Everybody ready? Let me just say hello to D. Lynn Creative Arts, Wildflower, Clark Fine Art. Thank you both for being here and moderating. Who else is here? Starving Artist Collective, Boo Peep. Hello to everyone who's here. George Pencil Art. If I didn't say you, I do see you. Okay, ready? Let me get my brushes ready. So, get this a little wet. I'm gonna start with the background, and I may end up having to repaint him. I'm gonna try and stay away from him, but who knows if that'll work. Yeah. Okay, ready? Let's go. Chapter 1: Whispers of the Woods. The town of Ember Falls was like something out of an old postcard. Quaint, quiet, nestled between rolling hills and the thick embrace of the forest. Autumn had just begun to paint the trees in hues of red, orange, and gold, a perfect backdrop for Claire's escape from the chaos of city life. She had come here to recharge, to breathe in the crisp air and forget about deadlines for a while. But as she passed the crooked sign reading Ember Falls, population 665, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that she wasn't entirely welcome. At the local inn, she had struck up a conversation with the innkeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Green, whose weathered face seemed to hold the weight of many years spent watching the town change around her. "You're not from around here, are you, dear?" Miss Green had asked, a knowing smile on her lips. "What brings you to a place like this?" "I'm just here for some peace and quiet," Claire replied. "I've always been fascinated by small towns like this. So much history, so many stories." Miss Green's smile faded ever so slightly. "Stories, yes. We have plenty of those." There was a pause, thick with unspoken words. "If you're looking for peace, you'll find it here," the innkeeper said, after a moment. But the way she said it felt like a warning. "Just be careful around the woods at night." "Why? Is there something I should know?" Claire asked, her curiosity piqued. "Nothing more than old wives' tales," Miss Green said quickly, but her eyes darted to the window, where the tree line loomed in the distance. "Just best to stay in town after dark." That night, as Claire lay in bed, the words echoed in her mind. The wind outside carried the rustle of leaves, a sound both soothing and eerie in the stillness. She drifted off, dreaming of dark woods and flickering lights that danced just out of sight. The next morning, over breakfast at the small diner, she overheard bits of a conversation between the locals. They spoke in hushed tones about the fires that had started again, strange blazes that appeared and disappeared without a trace, leaving only scorched earth in their wake. "Started early this year," one man said, shaking his head. "Must be Jack-o'-lantern," another muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire's interest was piqued again. She had come to Ember Falls for relaxation, but the journalist in her couldn't resist the pull of a good mystery. Later that day, she took a long walk along the forest's edge, her camera slung over her shoulder. The air was cool, and the autumn leaves crunched underfoot. But there was something off, something she couldn't quite place. The woods seemed darker than they should have been, the shadows longer, and the silence heavier. As she ventured deeper into the trees, she noticed the first sign, an old patch of blackened earth, as if something had been burned there. No charred branches or sign of a campfire, no rocks to hold a fire, just a circular patch of scorched earth. She knelt down, running her fingers over the dry, brittle soil. It was strange. There had been no rain for days, yet the surrounding vegetation remained untouched. That night, back in her room, Claire couldn't stop thinking about the blackened earth. She tried searching online for information about the local fires, but there was almost nothing. Just vague mentions in old articles, all hinting at the same phenomenon, but offering no concrete explanation. As she prepared for bed, a faint glow caught her eye through the window. She moved closer, her heart skipping a beat as she peered into the darkness. Deep in the woods, barely visible through the trees, was a flickering light. It swayed gently, like the flame of a lantern, casting long shadows that danced eerily in the night. Claire's breath hitched. She watched, transfixed, as the light seemed to move, disappearing behind the trees before reappearing in another part of the forest. It was as if someone or something was wandering through the woods, carrying a lantern made of fire. A chill ran down her spine, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Ember Falls, she felt a creeping sense of unease. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just a trick of the light. Okay, how we doing so far? The innkeeper did it. Sound is great. Excellent. Sounds spooky. Love the voices. I should narrate an audible. Oh, there's an idea. Um, Black is super dark. It's actually like red oxide brown, so it's actually looking a little bit darker on this. Let me see if I can fix that. Um, I don't want to lose the image. Nah. Nah. I'll leave it the way it is. It looks maroon to you? Okay. It's supposed to be brown. Okay, so working on the background still. And let's continue. Chapter 2. The Flickering in the Trees. The next morning, Claire felt a restless energy settle in her bones. Her night had been filled with disjointed dreams of flickering lights and dark woods, shadows shifting in ways that didn't seem natural. She'd woken several times, half expecting to see the glow through her window again, but each time, the forest remained a silent silhouette against the night sky. Over breakfast, she debated whether to tell anyone what she had seen, but something stopped her. The townspeople were already guarded about the woods, and Claire wasn't ready to be dismissed as another curious outsider chasing after ghost stories. So instead, she kept quiet and planned her day. By mid-afternoon, the overcast sky added a layer of gloom to Ember Falls. The town felt even smaller under the weight of the low-hanging clouds, and the woods loomed more ominously. But Claire couldn't shake the urge to go back. There was something in those trees, something she had to understand. Equipped with her camera and a small notebook, she made her way back to the forest's edge, determined to investigate further. The crisp autumn air bit at her skin as she ventured deeper than she had the day before. This time, there was no hesitation in her steps. The forest floor was damp beneath her boots, and the occasional rustling of leaves was the only sound that broke the oppressive silence. As she walked, Claire became aware of how isolated she was. The further she went, the more the town felt like a distant memory. The canopy overhead thickened, casting the woods in dim, filtered light. The trees seemed taller here, their branches reaching high, like skeletal arms, and the shadows between them seemed unnaturally still, as if waiting for something. Claire stopped to take a few photos of the dense forest, but as she lifted her camera, something shifted in the corner of her vision. A faint flicker. She lowered the lens and squinted into the distance, scanning the darkened spaces between the trees. There it was again, a small faint light, orange and dim, like the ember of a dying fire flickered between the trunks. It was far away, barely visible, but unmistakable. Her heart thudded in her chest as she stood frozen, watching the light bob and sway gently, moving through the forest as though it had a life of its own. She should turn back. She knew that. But curiosity, and perhaps a touch of recklessness, pulled her forward. Quietly, carefully, she began to follow the light, her breath becoming shallow as the sense of being watched crept over her. Every snap of a twig beneath her boots felt amplified in the silence, and with each step, the light grew a little brighter, a little closer. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, and the forest seemed to stretch on endlessly. The light continued to move, always just out of reach, leading her deeper into the heart of the woods. Claire felt the temperature drop as she walked, the air growing colder with each passing minute. She wrapped her jacket tighter around herself, the chill biting through her clothes. Then, without warning, the light stopped. Claire halted, her pulse racing. It hovered in the distance, flickering faintly, as if beckoning her forward. But something about it felt wrong. She couldn't explain it, but the way it floated there, unnatural, still, set her nerves on edge. Suddenly, the light flared bright, casting long, jagged shadows across the forest floor. Claire grasped and stumbled backward, shielding her eyes from the intense glow. The heat from the light was sudden and overwhelming, the air thick with the scent of smoke. When she opened her eyes, the light was gone. But where it had been, there was something else. A figure. Tall, impossibly tall, with a slender, unnatural frame. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The figure stood motionless, half obscured by the trees, its form barely visible in the dim light of the forest. But the head, there was no mistaking it. Perched atop the figure's elongated neck was a glowing jack-o'-lantern, its carved face twisted into a grotesque grin. The hollow eyes of the lantern burned with an unnatural orange light, casting eerie flickers that seemed to dance along the ground at its feet. For a long moment, Claire couldn't move. She couldn't even breathe. The creature stood there, watching her, though it had no eyes to see. The oppressive heat she had felt moments ago lingered in the air, and the smell of smoke clung to her clothes. Suddenly, the figure moved. Slowly it raised one long, skeletal arm, pointing toward her with a bony finger. Run! The word screamed in her mind. An instinct finally kicked in. Claire turned on her heel and bolted through the forest, branches clawing at her clothes and face as she ran. The forest seemed to blur around her, the trees closing in, the shadows deepening. She didn't dare look back. She didn't want to know if it was following. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart pounding in her chest as she tore through the underbrush. The path she had followed was lost now, and all she could think of was putting as much distance between herself and the creature as possible. The sounds of the forest became a chaotic symphony, her footsteps crashing through the leaves, the frantic rustling of branches, and the ever-present crackling sound that reminded her too much of fire. After what felt like an eternity, she burst through the tree line and into the open field that bordered the town. She collapsed onto the grass, her legs trembling, her lungs burning from the exertion. For several minutes she lay there, staring up at the gray sky, trying to catch her breath and calm the wild beating of her heart. When she finally dared to look back toward the forest, there was no sign of the creature. No glowing jack-o'-lantern, no figure watching from the shadows. The woods stood silent and still, as if nothing had happened. But Claire knew better. She could still feel the heat, still smell the faint trace of smoke in the air. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was out there, somewhere in the depths of the forest, watching, waiting. Claire forced herself to her feet and stumbled back toward the town. Her mind raced with questions, but one thought drowned out the rest. She had to know more. There is a little bit of a gap there. Thank you for pointing it out. So we're getting closer to having the background done. How's the story going so far? Let me see if I can fix that gap a little bit. Probably putting my hand in wet paint right now. Yep, just a little bit. And I'm gonna try and get just in between the lines here. And I'm letting all that dry by accident, but I kind of like the effect. Okay. So the background is getting closer to done. It needs to be a little bit. I'm making a mess here. Ooh. Watch what you're doing when you're cleaning your brushes. I'm sorry to tell you, starving artist, Claire is not going to be eaten. Okay, let me just check up on chat. No, Claire. Great and spooky. Okay, ready? We'll get back into it. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. The Fire Walks. Claire couldn't shake the image of the creature, the tall, slender figure with the glowing jack-o'-lantern head, no matter how hard she tried. Back in town, the world seemed calm. Too calm, considering what she had witnessed. People went about their daily lives, oblivious to the terror lurking in the woods. But for Claire, every shadow felt like it held a threat, every whisper of the wind a warning. The next few days passed in a haze. Claire spent hours wandering the streets, trying to find anyone willing to talk about the creature, the fires, or the strange things happening in the woods. But the townspeople were wary, shutting down whenever she brought up the subject. At the local diner, she sat at the counter with a cup of coffee, stirring it absent-mindedly. Around her, conversations drifted in and out, but none touched on the subject that consumed her thoughts. Frustrated, she flagged down the waitress, a young woman named Jenny, who had been friendly with her since she arrived. "Hey, Jenny," Claire started hesitantly, keeping her voice low. "Can I ask you something? Have you heard anything about strange fires in the woods? Or anything about a creature? A figure with a jack-o'-lantern head?" Jenny's face paled, and she immediately busied herself with wiping down the counter, avoiding eye contact.
I don't know what you're talking about,
she said quickly, her tone clipped. Claire leaned forward, lowering her voice even more.
Please, I know there's something going on. I saw it. I saw the creature in the woods.
For a moment, Jenny froze, her hand stilled on the rag, and her eyes darted around the diner as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Finally, she sighed, leaning in closer to Claire.
You really shouldn't be asking about that,
she whispered.
People don't talk about it. It's safer that way. Why? What's going on? I need to know,
Claire insisted, her pulse quickening. Jenny hesitated, glancing around once more before lowering her voice even further.
It's called Jack the Lantern. He shows up in the fall, when the air turns cold. The fires, the scorched patches in the woods, that's him. My grandma used to tell me stories about it. When I was little, said he was a spirit, something cursed, something that brings the fire with him wherever he goes.
Claire leaned in closer, her mind racing.
Has anyone ever tried to stop him? To figure out what he wants?
Jenny shook her head.
No one who ever goes looking ever comes back quite right. Most people know better than to follow the lights in the woods. If you see Jack the Lantern, you stay inside. You let him pass. That's all anyone can do. But why now?
Claire pressed.
Why are the fires starting again?
Jenny's face grew tight with fear.
No one knows. Some years he doesn't come at all. Others, well, people say it's like he's looking for something. Or someone.
Claire sat back, her mind buzzing with this new information.
Looking for someone? Who?
Jenny bit her lip, her eyes flickering toward the door as if she expected someone to walk in at any moment.
It's just a story. But people say Jack the Lantern was once a man, a real-life person, who was wronged a long time ago. They say he's searching for the one who betrayed him. And until he finds them, he'll keep walking the woods, spreading the fire.
A chill ran down Claire's spine.
And what happens if he finds them?
Jenny shook her head, her expression grim.
No one knows. No one wants to know.
Before Claire could ask anything more, the diner door swung open, and a group of locals entered, their voices loud and cheerful. Jenny straightened up immediately, her mask of indifference slipping back into place. She gave Claire a quick, tight smile before turning away to serve the new customers. Claire sat there for a moment, her mind racing. So Jack the Lantern wasn't just a spirit of mindless destruction. There was a purpose behind his movements, a reason for the fires. He was searching for something. But what or who was he looking for? Why did he leave behind nothing but scorched earth in his wake? That night, back in her room at the inn, Claire found herself unable to sleep. The thought of Jack the Lantern, the creature that had come so close to her in the woods, haunted her every moment. She could still feel the heat from his presence, the searing air that had surrounded him. And now, knowing that he was searching for something, made her fear him even more. She tossed and turned in bed, the rustling of leaves outside her window sounding too much like the crackle of a distant flame. Finally, after hours of restless shifting, she gave up on sleep altogether. Throwing on a sweater and grabbing her notebook, Claire decided to take another walk, hoping the cool night air would clear her mind. She hadn't intended to go far, just a stroll around the quiet streets of Ember Falls, but her feet carried her toward the woods, as if drawn there by some invisible force. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground, and the trees stood like silent sentinels at the edge of town. Claire paused at the tree line,
staring into the dark, tangled branches. The woods seemed different at night, more alive, more dangerous. Every instinct told her to turn back, to head toward safety, and leave the mystery of Jack the Lantern alone. But she couldn't. She stepped into the forest. The path beneath her feet was familiar, the same one she had taken days ago, when she first encountered the creature. But now, under the cover of night, everything felt more oppressive, as if the forest itself was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. As she walked deeper, the smell of smoke began to fill the air, faint at first, then stronger, more pungent. Her pulse quickened. She recognized that smell. The fires had started again. In the distance, just beyond the line of trees, Claire saw the first flicker of orange light, the same unnatural glow she had seen before. She stopped. Jack the Lantern was here, somewhere nearby, moving through the forest as he always did. But this time, Claire wasn't just going to run. She needed answers. She needed to know what this creature was, and why it was terrorizing the town. She moved forward cautiously, keeping her footsteps light, her eyes fixed on the distant glow. The smell of smoke grew stronger, and with it came the unmistakable sound of crackling flames. Suddenly, she froze. There, just ahead, standing at the edge of a clearing, was Jack the Lantern. Its elongated limbs casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. The jack-o'-lantern head burned brightly, its carved face twisting in the flickering light, and the fire inside seemed to pulse with life. It stood motionless, watching the woods, as if waiting for something to appear from the darkness. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, her body screaming at her to run, but she held her ground, too terrified or too curious to move. The creature didn't seem to notice her, or if it did, it didn't care. It stood there, its head turning slowly from side to side, scanning the forest. And then, as if on some unseen cue, the fire within the creature flared brighter, and the air around it seemed to ripple with heat. The ground beneath it began to blacken, and the trees nearby started to smolder, smoke rising from the bark as the flames licked at their trunks. The fire was spreading. Claire watched in horror as the creature raised one long, skeletal arm and pointed toward the woods. As if in response, the flames leapt from the ground, igniting the trees in a blazing inferno. The heat was intense, suffocating, and the sound of crackling wood filled the air. She couldn't stay there any longer. The fire was too close, too dangerous. Without another thought, Claire turned and ran, the roar of the flame behind her driving her forward. The forest blackened around her as she sprinted through the underbrush, her lungs burning from the smoke, the heat, and the exertion. Finally, she burst out of the woods and into the open field, gasping for breath as she collapsed on the cool grass. She glanced back to the forest's edge, half expecting to see Jack the Lantern emerging from the flames. But there was nothing, only the distant glow of the fire as it spread through the forest. Claire lay there, her body trembling from fear and exhaustion. The fires were getting worse, and the creature, whatever it was growing bolder. It was no longer content to stay hidden in the woods. Something was coming, and Claire wasn't sure if the town of Ember Falls would survive it.
Okay, chapter 3 is over. Trying to get these trees in here without destroying anything. That tree is awfully crooked at the bottom, isn't it? I do want them to just kind of trail off. How we doing? Moth to a flame, exactly. Yes, only you can prevent forest fires. Thank you, Smokey. Smokey the Clark Fine Art. Dumpster fire at the diner, chapter 4. Trees can grow like that. Yeah. Claire as a barbecue kebab. Okay. So got most of the background done. I might tool with some of these transitions, but it's okay. I kind of like it. Starting on the trees, getting them blocked in. They need a little work each. As long as the paint is gonna continue to dry as fast as it is, we should be okay. So let's continue. Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. Old Warnings, New Flames. Claire's heart pounded in her chest long after she fled the forest. The image of Jack the Lantern etched into her mind. His towering figure, the flames at his feet, the way the trees ignited just by his presence. It was all too much. Yet, as terrifying as the experience was, her curiosity had grown even stronger. Who, or what, was Jack the Lantern really? And why had he come back now, after years of silence? As she lay in bed that night, sleep was impossible. The memory of the heat, the crackling of the flames haunted her. The townspeople clearly knew something. Jenny had warned her. But there had to be more to the story. What was it about Jack the Lantern's curse? What had happened all those years ago? By the time the sun rose, Claire had made up her mind. She needed more answers, and the only way to find them was to dig deeper into Ember Falls history. Somewhere in this town, there had to be a record of what had happened. Something in the past had awakened this creature. At the town's modest library, Claire met Mrs. Hargrove, a frail old woman who had worked as the librarian for decades. When Claire asked her about old town records, Miss Hargrove hesitated, her eyes narrowing behind her thick glasses.
"Why would you be interested in that, dear?"
she asked cautiously, her voice betraying a flicker of fear.
"Most of those old records aren't of much use anymore. Nothing but tales of the past."
"I'm just doing some research," Claire replied as casually as she could, though her pulse quickened. "On local legends, old folklore. I've always been fascinated by small town stories, especially when they involve unexplained phenomena." Miss Hargrove's lips tightened. For a long moment, she said nothing, simply eyeing Claire with an unreadable expression. But then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she pushed back her chair and walked toward a locked cabinet in the far corner of the library.
"These are old records,"
she said as she opened the drawer, her voice quiet.
"and some of them are better left alone. But if you insist..."
She pulled out a weathered folder, its edges frayed and yellowed with age.
"This is what remains of early town history. Some of it's folklore, some of it's fact. You'll have to decide for yourself."
Claire thanked her and took the folder to a quiet corner of the library. The papers inside were brittle, the ink faded in places, but she could still make out the stories. Stories of fires that had ravaged the forest decades ago, of a mysterious figure seen wandering the woods. Jack the Lantern wasn't a new phenomenon. He had appeared in the past, always in the fall, always accompanied by flames that scorched the earth. But there was more. Claire found an old newspaper clipping from the early 1800s, recounting a strange trial that had taken place in Ember Falls. The details were sparse, but it seemed a man had been accused of witchcraft, of using dark magic to control fire. The town had turned on him, and he had been executed in the very woods where Jack the Lantern now roamed. As Claire read further, her hands began to shake. According to the article, the man's dying words had been a curse. He swore he would return, that his spirit would walk the woods, bringing fire and destruction until justice was served. Jack the Lantern was more than a legend. He was real, and he was seeking revenge. Claire left the library in a daze, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her. Jack the Lantern wasn't just a vengeful spirit. He had been wronged, and now he was exacting his wrath on the town that had betrayed him. But why now? Why, after all these years, had the fires started again? Lost in thought, Claire almost didn't notice the small crowd gathering near the town square. Smoke drifted through the air, and she quickened her pace, her heart sinking as she neared the source. Another fire. This one was smaller than the inferno she had seen in the woods, but the damage was undeniable. A small barn on the outskirts of town had gone up in flames, the charred remains still smoldering in the late afternoon sun. Townspeople stood around, talking in hushed tones, their faces drawn with worry. Claire caught sight of Sheriff Dalton, the local law enforcement, surveying the scene with a grim expression. She had met him briefly when she first arrived, but he had been distant, polite but unhelpful. Now she approached him, hoping for some answers.
"Sheriff,"
she called, her voice urgent.
"do you know what caused the fire?"
Dalton turned to her, his eyes dark with concern. Not yet, but this isn't the first one we've had recently. Folks around here think it's just bad luck, dry weather and all, but I know better. Claire's heart raced.
"You've seen him too, haven't you?"
The sheriff's eyes narrowed. What do you mean?
"Jack the Lantern,"
she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening.
"I've seen him in the woods. He's the one starting the fires."
For a moment, Dalton said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slow exhale, he nodded. I've heard the stories, he said quietly. My father used to talk about it. Said there were years when strange things happened in the woods, when fires would start for no reason. But people around here don't want to believe in old ghost stories. They'd rather think it's just nature taking its course. Claire glanced at the smoking ruins of the barn, her stomach twisting with unease.
"But this is more than just bad luck. He's back, and he's angry."
The sheriff ran a hand over his face, the weight of the situation clear in his eyes. If you're right, then we've got bigger problems than a few fires. But I don't know how to stop something like that. Claire swallowed, the memory of Jack the Lantern's twisted grin flashing in her mind.
"There has to be a way. He's looking for something, or someone. If we can figure out what it is, maybe we can stop him before it's too late."
Dalton met her gaze, and, for the first time, she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes.
Then we better find out. Fast. The fires are getting worse. If we don't do something soon, this whole town could go up in flames. That night, Claire couldn't stay still. Every creak of the floorboard, every gust of wind outside her window made her jump. She knew Jack the Lantern was out there, walking through the woods, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized the fires weren't random. They were deliberate, controlled, as if the creature was searching for something specific. She pulled out the old records she had taken from the library, poring over the details again and again, looking for clues. The man who had been accused of witchcraft, the one whose curse had brought Jack the Lantern into existence, had been wronged, betrayed by the very people he had once trusted. But who had betrayed him? And why was Jack the Lantern still seeking vengeance all these years later? As the hours dragged on, Claire felt her frustration mount. She was missing something, some vital piece of the puzzle. Jack the Lantern was walking the woods for a reason. But what was it? Was there someone in town connected to his past? Or was it something more symbolic, an ancient debt that had yet to be paid? A sudden knock on her door jolted her from her thoughts. Claire's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she considered ignoring it. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. She opened the door to find Jenny standing there, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear.
"He's coming,"
Jenny whispered, her voice trembling.
"Jack the Lantern. He's coming. For you."
Okay. Still going strong. Trying to get these trees in here. And just trying to get this background worked out. Want that to be a little bit smoother. See if I can. That's pretty good. My little water bucket here is becoming disgusting, so I hope I don't have to go and change that. Just reading the comments. He's looking for a body. Thank you, Starving. I hope it's coming out good. Yeah, like I said, I threw it together in a week, but I worked my ass off to get this done. I actually got a blister on my like mouse thumb. Like, yeah, this took many hours to get done. Okay, so that was chapter 4, right? I gotta make sure I know where I am. Yes, that was chapter 4. Okay, so trees are pretty much blocked in. Let me get just a little bit more in here. That didn't work. Okay, trees are blocked in. I think it's time to start on Jack himself. I really want. Let me see if I can just. There's a spot there that I didn't like. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start on Jack now, which means definitely smaller brushes for the most part. Um, I'm going to fill in most of his body. That'll help things out. And yeah, we'll see what we can do and how well it works. He's mostly going to be black and gray ish. So, okay. There are people yelling outside for some reason. Probably the turkey. The turkey likes to run around outside. Still don't know whose turkey it is, but it likes to run outside and it chases cars. So it causes traffic jams constantly. Okay, getting into it. Chapter 5, here we go.
Chapter 5. Jack the Lantern's Warning. Claire felt the air leave her lungs as Jenny's words hung in the silence between them. The fear in Jenny's eyes was palpable, her breath shallow and quick. It was one thing to speculate about Jack the Lantern, to see the fires from a distance, but this was personal now.
What do you mean?
Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. She instinctively looked past Jenny into the darkened street, half expecting to see the flickering glow of Jack the Lantern somewhere in the shadows. Jenny stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, closing the door behind her with shaking hands.
He's coming for you. I don't know how, but I can feel it. The fires have been spreading, getting closer to town. Tonight they're too close.
Claire's stomach twisted with dread.
How do you know? Did you see him?
Jenny shook her head, pacing across the small room.
I didn't have to. It's in the air, the heat, the smell. I've lived here my whole life. You can sense when he's near, and tonight, it's different. He's not just wandering the woods. He's looking for something, and I think it's you.
Claire's throat went dry.
But why me? I'm not even from here. Why would he be looking for me?
Jenny paused, turning to face Claire with wide, fearful eyes.
I don't know. Maybe it's because you've been asking questions. Because you've seen him. Maybe that's enough. Or maybe it's because you're connected to whatever he's searching for.
Claire felt the weight of Jenny's words sink in. She hadn't considered the possibility before. Could it be that, in some way, she was tied to Jack the Lantern's curse? She had no family history here in Ember Falls. She had no family history in Ember Falls. No connection to the town before her visit. And yet, the thought lingered. What if there was more to her being here than she realized? Before she could respond, the room seemed to grow warmer, the air thick with an unsettling heat. Claire's heart began to race as a faint orange glow flickered through the window. She rushed over to look outside, her stomach dropping at the sight. A line of fire snaked through the trees at the edge of the town, small flames flickering up the trunks and igniting the dry branches overhead. The fire wasn't raging. It was controlled, deliberate, moving in a slow, methodical pattern, as if guided by an unseen hand. Jenny gasped, her voice trembling.
He's here!
Claire turned back to her, fear knotting in her chest.
We need to get out of here, now!
Without waiting for a response, Claire grabbed her jacket and shoved her notebook into her bag. She didn't know where they could go. Jack the Lantern seemed capable of walking wherever he pleased. But she knew staying inside, waiting for the fire to come to them, wasn't an option. The two women bolted out the door and into the street. The heat was oppressive, making it hard to breathe, and the crackling of distant flames filled the night air. Claire's mind raced as she tried to think of where they could go, somewhere safe, somewhere far from the flames.
Sheriff Dalton?
She muttered under her breath.
We need to find him. Maybe he knows what to do.
Jenny nodded, her eyes wide with terror, and the two of them sprinted down the darkened streets toward the sheriff's office. The town felt eerily deserted, as if everyone had already sensed the danger and taken shelter in their homes. Only the sound of their hurried footsteps and the distant roar of the fire broke the silence. As they neared the sheriff's office, Claire's heart sank. The building was dark, the door locked tight. She banged on it anyway, hoping, against hope, that Dalton was inside, but there was no answer.
He's not here,
Jenny whispered, her voice shaking.
What do we do now?
Claire glanced around, her thoughts racing. They couldn't stay in the open like this. The fire was spreading, and Jack the Lantern was out there, somewhere in the darkness, watching them. She could feel it, the sensation of being hunted, of being stalked by something unnatural.
There's an old church on the outskirts of town,
Jenny said suddenly, her voice filled with desperation.
It's abandoned, but it's made of stone. The fire can't get in there. We'll be safe, for a while.
Claire hesitated, her mind whirling with uncertainty. The church was far, and they'd have to pass through the edge of the woods to get there. But she had no other ideas. Staying in town was just too dangerous, and there was no telling when Jack the Lantern would strike again.
Okay,
Claire agreed, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her.
Lead the way.
The trek to the church was grueling. The heat grew worse with every step they took, and the oppressive smell of smoke seemed to cling to their skin. Claire kept glancing behind them, half expecting to see the flickering glow of Jack the Lantern's head in the distance. But for now, the night remained dark, save for the glow of the fires creeping ever closer to the town. Jenny led the way, her steps quick but careful, as they skirted the edge of the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted and blackened from years of previous fires. In the silence, every rustle of leaves or crack of a twig made Claire's pulse quicken. As they neared the outskirts of town, the church came into view, a small, crumbling stone structure nestled at the edge of the forest. It was old, its windows boarded up, and the roof sagging in places. But it was solid, and as Jenny had said, the stone walls would keep the flames at bay. They reached the church just as the fire reached the edge of town. Claire glanced back one last time, watching as the flames devoured the outermost trees. The fire wasn't random. They were being guided, pushed forward by Jack the Lantern.
Come on,
Jenny urged, pulling Claire toward the door. They slipped inside, shutting the heavy wooden door behind them with a loud creak. The inside of the church was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay and dust. Rows of broken pews lined the small room, and a rusted iron cross hung crookedly on the far wall. No one had been here for quite some time.
We should be safe in here,
Jenny whispered, her voice uncertain.
At least for a while.
Claire nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She set her bag down on one of the pews, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Jack the Lantern was more powerful than she had imagined, his fires creeping closer to the heart of the town. But why? What did he want? As Claire sat down, she pulled out the old records she had taken from the library earlier that day. She needed answers, and fast. There had to be something, some clue, some detail she had overlooked that would explain why Jack the Lantern had returned, and why he was now targeting her. Jenny watched her silently for a moment before speaking.
Do you really think we can stop him?
Claire glanced up, meeting Jenny's wide, frightened eyes. She wanted to say yes, to give Jenny the reassurance they both desperately needed. But the truth was, she didn't know. Jack the Lantern was ancient, driven by a curse that had endured for generations. Stopping him seemed impossible.
I don't know,
Claire admitted, her voice soft.
But we have to try. There has to be a reason he's back. Something that ties him to this town. If we can figure out what it is, maybe we can stop him.
Jenny nodded slowly, though the fear in her eyes remained.
What if we can't?
Claire didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she turned her attention back to the records, flipping through the fragile pages as the sound of crackling flames echoed faintly outside. Hours passed, the silence of the church broken only by the distant roar of the fire. Claire had gone through the records twice, but nothing new stood out. The man accused of witchcraft, the curse he had uttered, the years of fire and destruction, it was all there, but nothing explained why. Jack the Lantern had returned now, after decades of silence. Frustration gnawed at her, and she slammed the folder shut.
There's something missing,
she muttered, her voice tight with anger.
Something we're not seeing.
Jenny, who had been pacing nervously near the door, froze.
What do you mean?
Claire stood up, pacing herself now, her mind racing.
The fires, the curse, Jack the Lantern. It all goes back to that trial. He's seeking revenge for what happened to him, but we're missing the connection. There has to be a reason he's back now. And I think it's tied to someone here in town.
Jenny's eyes widened.
You think? He's after someone specific?
Claire nodded.
I do. I think that person might still be here. Someone descended from the people who betrayed him.
The fire crackled louder outside, and a chill ran down Claire's spine. Time was running out. Jack the Lantern was drawing closer, and if they didn't figure this out soon, the entire town would be reduced to ashes.
Are we enjoying it so far? Here, let me try this. If you like it, type yes in the chat, and if you're indifferent, type no. Good. Lots of yeses. That's what I wanted to see. I don't know what it is about painting on this, like, sort of angle coming in from the side that makes it so that I can't get a smooth line on the right. Drives me crazy. I always seem to end up smudging it out a bit. Maybe if I... That's pretty good. That's probably still wet. Okay. So as we continue, I'm going to make a mistake. Oh, and I wanted to... The thumbs downs that I was giving was for bad edits. If you didn't notice, there were at least 2 bad edits in there where I said the same thing twice. So, oops. It's bound to happen because it was rushed. See, I had a whole other idea for what I wanted to do on Halloween. And the problem with it is it was actually really complicated. And I'm going to save it for next year because I did start putting it together, but it was just too difficult to get done in the amount of time I gave myself. So the stuff that I've already worked on, I can keep for next year, and I'll just start earlier next year, setting up for my Halloween stream. Okay, so I'm going to continue working on Jack's body, and you're going to listen to chapter 6. So we're getting close to being done. There's only 7 chapters. Well, sure. Okay, so, yeah. So, ready? Here we go.
Chapter 6. The Forgotten Name. The church grew quieter as the night deepened, though the distant crackling of fire was an ever-present reminder that the danger had not passed. Claire sat hunched over the records she had brought, her eyes scanning every line for something, anything, that might give her a clue. The weight of the mystery was suffocating, pressing down on her with each passing minute. Jenny paced restlessly near the door, glancing out the small, grimy window, as if expecting Jack the Lantern to appear at any moment.
Who betrayed him?
Claire murmured under her breath.
There has to be a connection between the curse and someone still in town.
Jenny, hearing her, stopped pacing.
But how? This all happened over 100 years ago. Anyone involved is long gone.
Not necessarily, Claire replied, her brow furrowed.
Curses, legends, they don't always target the original people. Sometimes they seek out descendants. If Jack the Lantern was betrayed, maybe his spirit won't rest until he gets revenge on the family of those responsible.
Jenny's face paled.
You think he's coming after someone's family? But whose? I don't know, but if we can figure that out, we might be able to stop him.
She flipped through the pages again, desperate to find some mention of the people involved in the trial. Most of the details were vague, but then she noticed a brief paragraph she hadn't fully absorbed earlier. It listed the names of the jurors who had condemned the accused man to death. Her heart skipped a beat.
Look at this,
she said, mentioning for Jenny to come closer.
These are the names of the people who decided his fate. These families are probably still around.
Jenny leaned in, her eyes scanning the list.
The Ashcrofts, the Collins, the Hargroves.
Claire's mind raced. Miss Hargrove, the librarian? Could she be connected to Jack the Lantern's curse? Jenny's voice trembled as she pointed to the next name.
And the Daltons.
The sheriff. Claire's pulse quickened. Sheriff Dalton's family had been part of the trial that condemned the man to death. Was that why Jack the Lantern was back? Was Dalton, or someone close to him, the target?
We have to talk to the sheriff,
Claire said, standing up abruptly.
He might not know it, but his family could be the reason all this is happening.
Jenny swallowed hard, her eyes wide with fear.
Do you think he'll believe us?
Claire hesitated, knowing the sheriff had already been skeptical of the legends. But if he was connected to the curse, he needed to know.
We have to try. It's the only lead we have.
The journey back to town felt longer than it had earlier. The fire still burned in the distance, a creeping menace that seemed to follow them, always just beyond the tree line. As they walked through the streets of Ember Falls, Claire's nerves were on edge. Every shadow seemed to flicker, every rustle of leaves or gust of wind made her heart race. When they reached the sheriff's house, the lights were on. Claire felt a wave of relief. At least he was home. Claire knocked on the door, and after a few moments, Sheriff Dalton answered. His face was tired, his eyes dark with worry.
Claire? Jenny? What are you doing here this late?
We need to talk to you.
Claire said quickly, glancing nervously at the horizon where the glow of the fire still flickered faintly.
It's about Jack the Lantern.
Dalton's expression hardened.
I told you before, there's nothing.
There is,
Claire interrupted, her voice urgent.
I found records in the library. Your family, your ancestors, were part of the group. They condemned the man who became Jack the Lantern. That's why he's back. He's after the descendants of the people who betrayed him.
Dalton blinked, clearly taken aback. He stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of what Claire had just said.
That's just a story,
he said finally, though his voice wavered.
a ghost tale. It doesn't mean anything.
It does, Claire insisted. Think about it. The fires, they're not random. They're spreading, getting closer to town. He's searching for something. Someone. I think he's after you, or someone in your family.
The sheriff's jaw tightened, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes now.
Even if it were true,
He said slowly.
how do we stop him?
Claire hesitated. That part she didn't have an answer for. She had uncovered the history, the reasons behind Jack the Lantern's vengeance, but she still didn't know how to break the curse.
I'm not sure yet,
She admitted.
but I think the answer has to be in the records, in the history of what happened. There must be something that can stop him, something that can put him to rest.
Dalton glanced at the window, his face set in grim lines. The fire had reached the edge of town now, the faint glow casting an eerie light on the darkened street. He sighed heavily.
All right,
He said.
if there's even a chance you're right, I'll help. But we need to figure this out fast.
Back at the sheriff's office, Dalton pulled out his family records. They weren't as old as the ones Claire had found in the library, but they contained details about the Daltons and their role in the town history. As the three of them sifted through the documents, Claire's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information they had.
Here,
Dalton said, pointing to an old photograph of his grandfather, Elias Dalton.
he was the sheriff during the time of the trial. He was the one who led the charge to arrest the accused man.
Claire stared at the photo. Elias Dalton looked stern, with hard eyes and a firm, chiseled set to his mouth. He had been responsible for the man's execution, the very act that had led to the curse. If Jack the Lantern was seeking revenge, Elias Dalton's family would certainly be at the top of his list.
Do you think,
Claire started, her voice hesitant.
that Jack the Lantern wants you to suffer for what your great-grandfather did? Maybe he's not just after random destruction. Maybe he's looking for a way to get to you.
Dalton's face hardened, but he nodded.
It would make sense. My family was a part of what happened to him. If he's trying to right a wrong, maybe I'm the one he's after.
Claire's heart pounded. They were getting closer, but time was running out. The fires were spreading, and Jack the Lantern wouldn't stop until his vengeance was complete.
There has to be a way to stop him.
Claire said, her voice growing desperate.
Some way to break the curse.
Dalton stood up abruptly, crossing the room to the small safe in the corner. He opened it and pulled out a weathered old book, its pages brittle with age.
This belonged to Elias,
He said quietly.
It's been passed down through my family. I never paid much attention to it, but it's filled with notes about the trial, about the accused man. Maybe there's something in here that can help.
Claire took the book, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten notes detailing the trial, the man's arrest, and the events leading up to his execution. But as she flipped through, one passage stood out.
The curse will live on through flame and shadow until truth is brought to light. Only by revealing the betrayer can the fire be quenched.
Claire's heart nearly stopped.
The truth is the key,
she whispered.
Jack the Lantern won't stop until the truth about his betrayal is revealed.
Jenny frowned.
But we already know what happened. He was accused of witchcraft and executed.
Claire shook her head.
No, there's more to it. Something deeper. He wasn't just a victim of the trial. Someone must have framed him. If we can uncover the real betrayer, the one who condemned him, we might be able to break his curse.
Dalton looked grim.
If that's true, then we need to find out who it was.
Outside, the fires crept closer. The heat pressed against the windows of the sheriff's office. The smell of smoke filled the air. Time was running out, and Jack the Lantern was drawing nearer, his fiery vengeance consuming everything in its path. But now, Claire had a new sense of purpose. The curse could be broken, but only if they uncovered the real truth behind the trial. Somewhere in the past, the answer lay hidden, waiting to be revealed. And if they didn't find it soon, Ember Falls would be consumed by flames, and Jack the Lantern's wrath would claim them all.
Okay. Wrapping up chapter 6. And we're actually getting somewhere on Jack. This looks very dark. I know it might be a little hard to see. I really wish... I'm going to try one more time to see if I can lighten it up a little. Without blowing it out. That's a little better. Well, witchcraft entered the story, but there is no actual witchcraft. At least not to my knowledge. And the whole story is from my knowledge, so... Okay. Yes, thank you for doing the moderation type things. It's very much appreciated. Am I getting paint on my pants? No. I have to fix my little dabbing cloth thing here. Okay. Lift this because there's wet paint on it. Okay. Okay. So, I'm going to keep continuing. You guys are going to keep listening. We're getting closer to the end here. I will, of course, go long if need be. I may just have to throw a camera up on this scene that I have. Yeah. We'll figure that out if it goes long. So, this goes. I just want to get these things in here before I start, so I know exactly where they are. Okay. Ready for chapter 7? Here we go. Right? Yeah, chapter 7.
Chapter 7. The Betrayer Revealed. The air in Ember Falls had thickened with smoke. the creeping fires now edging dangerously close to the heart of the town. From the sheriff's office, Claire could see the flickering orange glow reflected in the darkened windows, and the oppressive heat pressed against them like an invisible hand, pushing them toward their final moments. But she couldn't let herself focus on that now. The only thing that mattered was the truth. Claire, Sheriff Dalton, and Jenny huddled over the old, brittle book Elias Dalton had left behind. The passage Claire had read was still fresh in their mind. The curse will live on through flame and shadow until the truth is brought to light. Only by revealing the betrayer can the fire be quenched. But the truth, the real betrayal, remained elusive. Dalton rubbed his temple, the stress evident on his face.
We know Elias led the charge against him, but if that man was framed, someone had to have orchestrated it. There has to be a name.
Claire nodded. She flipped through the pages of the book again, her eyes scanning for any mention of a key figure who might have stood to gain from the man's death. As she worked through the passage, Jenny sat tensely by the door, watching the distant flames move closer to town.
Look at this,
Claire said suddenly, stopping at an entry that seemed hastily scribbled, as though Elias had been unsure whether he should commit the words to paper. The ink was smudged, but it was still legible. I am haunted by the guilt. The man was no witch, but I did as I was told. I followed orders, kept my mouth shut. But the truth is, it was Reverend Samuel Ashcroft. Ashcroft made the false accusation to protect himself. He feared the man knew too much, knew of his dealings. I was complicit in his crime, and now I fear our town is cursed for it. Claire's heart skipped a beat as she read the passage aloud.
Reverend Samuel Ashcroft, she murmured. The Ashcroft family was one of the wealthiest in Ember Falls during that time. They would have had the influence to orchestrate a false accusation.
Jenny's eyes widened as pieces began to fit together.
Ashcroft and his descendants still live here. They're still part of the town.
Dalton's face was grim as he nodded.
The Ashcrofts have been here for generations. They've always held power, always had their hands in the town's affairs. If Samuel Ashcroft was responsible for the man's death, then his family has been carrying that burden of that crime for over 2 centuries.
Jack the Lantern's revenge isn't just about the people who condemned him,
Claire said, her voice steady.
It's about the real betrayal. Reverend Samuel Ashcroft betrayed him to save himself. And now, Jack the Lantern's spirit won't rest until the betrayal is revealed.
Dalton stood abruptly, crossing the room to grab his jacket.
We have to confront them now. If the Ashcrofts are the key to breaking this curse, we can't waste any more time. The fires are closing in. If we don't stop them soon, there won't be anything left of this town.
Claire and Jenny followed him outside, the heat of the fire now unmistakable as the flames licked at the trees on the outskirts of Ember Falls. The air was suffocating, filled with smoke and ash, and the sky above gloomed an ominous orange. Claire could feel Jack the Lantern's presence, like a dark shadow looming just beyond sight. They hurried through the streets, their footsteps echoing in the empty town. Most of the residents had fled or taken shelter, their doors and windows boarded up against the advancing flames. As they neared the Ashcroft estate, a large imposing house set on the edge of town, Claire felt her stomach twist with dread. Whatever they were about to uncover, it wouldn't be easy. Dalton pounded on the heavy wooden door, his fists landing with urgency. After a tense moment, the door creaked open, revealing Gregory Ashcroft, the current patriarch of the family. He had just returned after a long time away. He was an older man, his face drawn with concern, as he took in the sight of Dalton, Claire, and Jenny standing on his doorstep.
What's going on, Sheriff?
Gregory asked, his voice laced with unease.
"The fires are getting worse, and I've been trying to protect my family." "We don't have time for pleasantries, Gregory,"
Dalton said, his voice hard.
"We know the truth about your ancestor, Reverend Samuel Ashcroft. He's the one who framed the man that became Jack the Lantern. Your family is at the heart of this curse, and if we don't end it tonight, the whole town will burn."
Gregory's eyes widened in shock, and he took a step back.
"What are you talking about? That's impossible. My family had nothing to do with—"
Stop lying!
Claire cut in, her voice sharp.
We've read the records. Samuel Ashcroft betrayed that man, and now Jack the Lantern is back, seeking vengeance. Your family has been living with the stain of that betrayal for generations, and now it's time to make it right.
For a long moment, Gregory stood frozen, his face pale. The truth seemed to hang in the air between them, undeniably. He swallowed hard, his voice shaking when he finally spoke.
"I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know the full story. My father always told me that our family had a dark history, but he never told me the details. He thought it was just old rumors, superstition. But if you're saying it's true, if my family is responsible—" "You need to come with us," Dalton said, his tone urgent. "Jack the Lantern won't stop until the truth is revealed. You're the only one who can end this."
The journey back toward the heart of the town was a harrowing one. The fires had grown closer, the flames licking at the edge of the road, and the heat was nearly unbearable. Claire felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her with every step. The realization that they were heading straight into the heart of Jack the Lantern's wrath. As they approached the town square, the temperature seemed to spike, and the air was filled with an eerie crackling sound. Claire gasped deeply as she saw it. There, at the center of the square, stood Jack the Lantern. His towering figure loomed in the smoky haze, his jack-o'-lantern head glowing with a sickly orange light. The fire that emanated from him danced and flickered, curling around his slender frame like living tendrils of fire. His hollow eyes burned with a deep, malevolent hunger, and his presence radiated an ancient fury. Jack the Lantern turned slowly, his gaze locking onto them as they approached. The air grew unbearably hot, and Claire could feel the suffocating weight of his curse pressing down on them.
This is it,
she whispered to Gregory, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flames.
You need to tell him the truth. You need to confess what your family did.
Gregory hesitated for a moment, his eyes wide with fear. But then, with a deep breath, he stepped forward, his voice trembling.
"I'm sorry,"
Gregory called out to the lantern.
"I'm sorry for what my family did to you. My ancestor, Samuel Ashcroft, betrayed you. He framed you, condemned you to die for crimes you didn't commit. And for that, I am truly sorry."
Jack's hand stretched forward in an instant as he took hold of Gregory's head. Claire and Jenny could only look on in horror, flames running down his long, slender arms and into Gregory. A light started to shine inside of him as his clothes began to sear and spark. Spots began to burn and just as quickly turned to ash. Gregory was soon engulfed in a white-hot burning fire from the inside out, until nothing was left but slowly drifting embers on the breeze. Sheriff Dalton drew his revolver and aimed dead center Jack the Lantern's chest, his hands shaking like never before. Then a shot rang out. Claire and Jenny jumped at the sudden noise, but Jack the Lantern was unfazed. He turned to them all, his twisted face and head alight with fire. For a moment, nothing happened. The flames continued to burn, and Jack the Lantern stood motionless, his glowing eyes fixed on the small group. Claire held her breath, hoping that this would be enough. that the truth would finally quench Jack-o'-lantern's thirst for vengeance. Then slowly, the flames around Jack-o'-lantern began to dim. The fire that had been spreading through the town began to recede, the oppressive heat lifting as the curse started to break. The glow from Jack-o'-lantern's head flickered and sputtered as if the flames were dying out. Jack-o'-lantern's hollow eyes fixed on Claire, and for the briefest of moments, Claire thought she saw something in those eyes, something like relief. Then, with a final flicker of light, the Jack-o'-lantern head crumbled into ash, and Jack-o'-lantern's form disintegrated into the night, carried away on the wind like smoke and embers. The curse had been broken. The town of Ember Falls was still standing, though the damage from the fires would take time to heal. But the people were safe, and the shadow of Jack-o'-lantern had finally been lifted. As Claire stood in the cool dawn light watching the first rays of sunlight break through the dissipating smoke, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. The mystery had been solved, the curse undone, and the truth revealed. Ember Falls could finally begin to rebuild. Jenny stood beside her, her face still pale, but her eyes filled with relief.
"It's over, isn't it?"
Claire nodded. "It's over." Sheriff Dalston approached them, his face solemn but grateful.
You saved this town, Claire. I don't know how to thank you.
"You don't need to," Claire replied. "The truth was the key all along." As she turned to leave, the weight of the night's events still heavy on her mind, Claire knew that she would never forget what had happened here. The legend of Jack-o'-lantern would live on in the stories of Ember Falls, but now it would be a tale of redemption, a tale of how the truth had finally set the town free. And with that, Claire walked into the dawn, leaving the shadows of the past behind.
In the town of Ember Falls, a fire begins to spark. There's something out there in the woods and it's creeping through the dark. When the air begins to chill, the trees in autumn slur. When the shadows stretch across this land, you might meet his twisted stare. Jack-o'-lantern, a creature of the night. He burns like the fires of hell, his madness setting the world alight. Jack-o'-lantern, he's coming for you too. If you're not innocent, you'll see there's nothing you can do. This nightmare comes and goes every 20 years or so. In the darkness of the night, the blaze it seems to know. In the blackness of the woods, fire snakes from here to there. The creature fueled by ancient hate that causes his despair. Jack-o'-lantern, a creature of the night. He burns like the fires of hell, his madness setting the world alight. Jack-o'-lantern, he's coming for you too. If you're not innocent, you'll see there's nothing you can do. When twilight's growing longer, in the forest he will roam, creeping like a hellspawn from the catacomb. The townfolk speak in whispered tones as they all live in fear. The fire's closing in on town, the inferno growing near. When he places his hand upon you and gets you in his grip, your blood begins to boil, your skin begins to drip. The fire is inside you now, you sense
Sorry, I had to have fun with the credits. Oh boy. So, how are we doing? Narcissist. Yep. Ask me. So yeah. So we're not actually done yet. There is a little bit more to do. I'm just trying to get some of this gray in here. And I keep messing up the color. Okay, so there's a tiny little bit more of the story. So let me just do that now.
Epilogue. Parting is such sweet sorrow. The next day, Claire was getting her things packed into her car as Sheriff Dalton and Jenny looked on from the other side of the street. She waved to them, but they just turned and walked into the diner. Claire could feel it. She was a hero, but she wasn't a savior. This town needs to heal, and she being there would only slow the process. She got into her car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb in front of the inn. As she looked in the rear-view mirror, she saw Jenny creep into the street behind her. She gave a quick wave and hurried back inside. A small smile crept across Claire's face as she drove off down the road. A few minutes later, as she drove toward the highway back to the big city, a small wafting stream of smoke crossed the road ahead. She slowed as she grew closer and stopped dead in her tracks as it came into sight. A tree on the side of the road, an enormous oak older than Ember Falls itself, stood alone at the edge of the road. Burning in the bark running down its thick and strong trunk were 3 solitary words, still glowing with burning embers and pungent smoke. I'm not done.
Okay, there we go. Now we're done. I really do want to get this finished, but who knows if that's even going to be possible. Some of it should be, but I don't know about all of it. And what'd you think of the song? I'd like to know. Well, I'd like to know what you thought about all of it. But Yes, the librarian, the sheriff. Uh, who might be next? Probably seems weird now because now there's nothing. um, yeah, so now I guess I have to talk. Um, so yeah, I'm basically working on his like rib cage section ish, which should be getting a little bit darker as it goes in. Now I need to paint louder. Yes, indeed. So yeah, Jack the Lantern is the original Irish folktale of someone who was wrongly accused, or maybe they weren't wrongly accused. I don't even remember. But for some reason, they either celebrated him, or maybe the dressing up stuff came from uh yeah, these came too far in. See if I can cover those real quick, like. what I'm trying to do is to lay in kind of like the skeletal system. I'm gonna have to ignore that side for now. Um, I know there's some break. He's supposed to look all, I guess, like sinewy and stuff. Yeah, wow, this is so dark. I mean, it's dark, but it's not that dark. It's definitely not that light, but at least maybe now you can see it. Because I realize a lot of these marks I'm making aren't very easy to see. Yeah, I wasn't prepared for having to talk. So if I lose any of you, that's okay. What time is it? Yeah. Alright, so I basically went as long as I wanted to, but I wanted to have more done. Um, let's see if I can get some of his head done at least before we close up. Because he still needs quite some amount of work. I don't think so, but I can turn him off. Yeah, safe. Those they're not really that bright. Um. Okay, so how do I want to do? Probably start with that gray that I'm using. This gray is a little watery, so it might not work all that well. This is going to be tough because he was drawn completely in. Again, I messed up and used the same pencil I did last time, which was the, what do you call it? The water soluble graphite. I don't know why I keep grabbing that one when I want, you know, a pencil. So much paint on the brush, I can't get it to be a point. Hopefully, this is coming out okay. The head needs lots of work. It didn't quite dry enough yet. Trying to blend it in there, get it nice and tight. No, he's not wearing white socks. There's gonna be like fire on the bottom. And a little bit of that like brownish red coming into him in some places. I'm just trying to get the contrast right now. At least up here on his head. You know, you gotta get your values right. Little bit of a gap in there. I can fix that with some black, so not a problem. Okay, I need to let that dry a little bit. While I let that dry, let me come back down here. There is the highlight on the arm. Okay, let's get some work done here. Maybe in real life he was. That's too thick on that brush. I'm painting that in both to cover up my pencil lines as well as getting the color in there. I do need a little bit more orange. Yeah, I'm Clarking the hell out of this one, huh, Angela? Too much on that side. I don't like it. Put that in there. Um, hopefully this is going to give that glow that I want. Okay, I'm still working on this. Goodbye to everyone who has to go. I apologize for taking so long to do this. I knew I wasn't going to get it done, but I thought I'd get more than this. As per usual. One day I'll learn. I'm working in the brown now to kind of try and get it to look like a dark, like orange, but in the dark. Little brush I need just clean that out a bit. I need this. That's not wet enough at all to spread. Let's try this again. We're definitely getting somewhere. Um, Again, I am half up on that. A little bit of my red oxide. I'm definitely going to clean the mouth up at some point because that does not look good. I have very much run out of room on my palette. Need to try and fix around the stalk. Get that in there, hopefully, without messing anything up. Oh, without messing it up too much. It's too dark. Try and make it seem like texture or something. No, I wouldn't go back in to investigate either. No, no AI was involved in the story. Um, it may seem that way because, like I said, it was a longer story, and when like how you use like her heart skipped a beat, and then later on you say like you know, oh, you know, she felt a quiver, in her chest, and then you do that a bunch of different times, and then you take a bunch of stuff out to shorten the story, and you end up using the same one multiple times. That's kind of what happened. I think. I'm pretty sure that's about what happened. Okay. I am trying, however, to get some of this done. I know this probably looks weird. The idea is he has like these, like, he's like venting heat out of his like rib cage. So it's going to be like white hot, not white hot, but it's going to be orangey glow in here. And because my water is garbage right now, none of this is actually white. Did I just do that backwards? I just completely did that one backwards. But nothing that can't be fixed. It wouldn't be one of my streams if I didn't quote Lisa. Just because it's not done, or just because you made a mistake, doesn't mean it's destroyed. It just means you're not done. Something like that. How do I forget these things? Those are so far off, it's ridiculous. So I'm hoping you guys get the idea of what I was going for. Because I can't keep doing this forever. Eventually I gotta stop. There may be a book too. That would be an idea. I mean, I can't even take credit for the idea because I'm pretty sure it was Angela who did it first. I mean, other people have probably done it as well, but Angela did like the Halloween painting with a story before I did. I don't even know how many people are still here. I know Angela and Starving are here because they keep talking, but I don't know if anyone else is still here. Okay. Well, hello, Angela and Starving, and whoever's lurking in the background. Okay, so I think that's what I'm going to call it because my eyes are getting destroyed here. The other idea was a spoof on recent found footage horror movie franchise. If that gives anyone a clue for next year. But franchise, so it's been around for a while, but fairly recent. But yeah, I'll finish him some other time. I gotta do all the fire down here, little branches on the trees, and little bits of fire on there. One of the things I was going to do was I was going to do the toothbrush, like stars, but I'm gonna make then little dot of orange to make it an ember. So it's supposed to be a little bit of fire like coming out of the eyes and a little bit out of here and like a little bit like on his hands in places. But yeah, he needs some work. He definitely needs some work, and I'm not. Uh, let's see if we can do this. That's the wrong button, but okay. Um, yeah. So thank you everyone who joined me. I'm glad you liked the story. I hope you liked everything, even the stupid credits with the me talking to myself. Thank you, Clark Fine Art and D. Lynn, who's already left, but thank you both for joining me. Their links are in the description. Angela, I don't know if Angela is streaming Thursday. probably. No, I'm not telling you. I'm not telling you what franchise it is. You can guess all you want, but I won't tell you. Yeah. So, if you liked what you saw, and you might want to see more, I will probably finish this and film it. I still have to do the finish the fall painting, which is over here in the exact same state I left it. So I got so involved with putting this whole thing together that I never found the time to do it. So over the next week, I'll work on those and I'll put those videos up eventually. We all know how I hate editing. So, but yeah, we got somewhere. We did some good work today. And I hope you were entertained. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Hit the buttons, do the things, and I'll see you next time. No outro this time, just an ending. Fade to black.